A splash of mud, that's all it took. One careless moment, one cruel laugh. A billionaire, sitting high in his luxury car, and a nurse, standing alone on the street, her uniform stained and dignity tested. He thought it was funny. He thought it was nothing. But what happened next would change his life forever. The city was alive that morning. Horns blared like impatient drums. Footsteps rushed over cracked sidewalks. Street vendors shouted their prices, weaving their voices into the endless song of survival. It was a place where everyone seemed to be chasing time, as though time itself was a cruel master holding a whip. Among that restless crowd walked a young nurse. Her eyes were heavy from a night without sleep. Yet behind their fatigue was something unshakable, the quiet pride of someone who had just saved lives. Her steps were slow, but not weak. Her hands trembled from exhaustion, but her spirit held firm. She carried no jewels, no perfume, no shine of wealth, only the soft fragrance of compassion and the worn strength of duty. Her uniform was not spotless. A faint trace of blood remained on the sleeve, the memory of a child she had fought to save. Her shoes were tired, her bag nearly empty, but her heart was full. And then, it happened. Tires screeched. Water surged. A wave of filthy mud rose like a sneer from the street and came crashing down on her. The splash was cruel, merciless. It coated her uniform, her bag, her skin. The crowd gasped. Some turned away in discomfort, others whispered. She stood frozen, her chest rising and falling, her mind struggling to process what had just occurred. And the man behind the wheel laughed. He sat in a gleaming black car, polished until the sunlight itself seemed enslaved to its shine. His wrist bore a watch worth more than the nurse could earn in years. His eyes carried the arrogance of someone who believed the world was his toy. When his laughter rang out, it was not soft, not embarrassed, but sharp, mocking, cruel. To him, it was nothing. Just a moment. Just a poor woman in the wrong place at the wrong time. Just another story he would forget within seconds. But fate had other plans. The nurse lowered her eyes, pressing her lips together to stop the sting of tears. She wanted to scream. She wanted to curse him, to tell the world how unfair it all was. But she said nothing. Silence was her shield. She straightened her back, wiped her face with trembling hands, and kept walking. The mud clung to her body like a shadow, but she carried herself with dignity. For her, there were patients waiting, lives that needed her. She could not afford to crumble. And yet, her heart whispered, "Why? Why must kindness always walk while cruelty rides? Why does life reward arrogance and mock humility?" But the story was only beginning. Later that day, in the cold walls of the hospital, the nurse returned to her battlefield. Machines hummed. Children cried. Families prayed. She changed bandages, checked pulses, whispered words of comfort. The mud on her uniform had been washed away, but its memory remained. Still, she did her work quietly, faithfully. What she did not know was that destiny was already writing its next chapter. For the man who had laughed the billionaire with untouchable pride would soon find himself at the mercy of the very hands he had mocked. It came suddenly. A phone call, an accident, the roar of twisted metal, the same black car, once a throne of arrogance, now bent and broken. And the man who once laughed sat pale, wounded, his breath shallow, his power useless. When they brought him to the hospital, his pride was nowhere to be seen. His eyes searched desperately, his lips trembled. And when the nurse walked in, when their eyes met, recognition struck like lightning. He remembered her. The street, the mud, the laugh. She remembered too. The mockery, the pain, the cruel smile. The air between them froze. Two worlds clashed silently in that room: wealth and poverty, arrogance and humility, laughter and silence. But the nurse did her duty. With steady hands, she cleaned his wounds. With a calm voice, she gave instructions. She treated him not as an enemy, not as the man who had mocked her, but as a patient, because her vow was not selective. Her compassion was not for sale. And for the first time, the billionaire felt something he had never felt before: shame. He looked at her and saw not just a nurse, but a strength he could not buy, a dignity he could not touch, a beauty that was not painted on the skin, but carved into the soul. Night after night, as his recovery continued, their paths crossed again and again. Sometimes in silence, sometimes in short exchanges. She never mentioned the mud. She never spoke of the laugh. But her quiet presence, her patience, her devotion, it began to chip away at the fortress around his heart. And in the stillness of those hospital nights, his arrogance cracked. Behind the mask of wealth and cruelty, there was something else: pain, loneliness, scars no money could heal. He had laughed at the world because it was easier than letting the world see him cry. Slowly, the man who once mocked began to change. He watched the nurse, not with the eyes of pride, but with the eyes of longing. He admired the way she comforted a child, the way she encouraged the weak, the way she carried her burdens in silence but never let them crush her spirit. He realized something he had never admitted before. He was the one who was poor. Poor in kindness, poor in love, poor in humanity. And the nurse, the woman he had stained with mud, was the richest soul he had ever met. But fate was not done weaving its thread. One night, when the storm outside roared like an angry beast, he confessed. With a broken voice, with eyes that finally carried truth instead of pride, he told her about his past, about the pain he had hidden behind money, about the laughter he had used as a shield, about the emptiness that haunted him. The nurse listened, quietly, patiently, just as she had listened to countless cries of suffering in the hospital. And when he finished, she did not judge, she did not condemn, she simply said, "Sometimes the wounds we don't see are the ones that hurt the most." It was then he understood. Her kindness was not weakness. Her silence was not surrender. She was stronger than him, not because of wealth or status, but because she had learned to heal not just others, but herself. And in that moment, the billionaire knew. The splash of mud had not ruined her. It had ruined him. For he had thought it was nothing. But it was everything. The beginning of the end of his arrogance. And the beginning of a love story fate had written long before either of them knew. A cruel laugh. A nurse's dignity. A splash of mud. Sometimes, the smallest moments change everything. The bus jolted down the city streets, each stop filling with more tired faces heading into their morning grind. Anna sat quietly by the window, her scrubs still damp, her spirit heavy. She pressed her lips together, determined not to cry, but the sting of humiliation from Alexander Cross's careless act lingered. She clutched her bag to her chest and whispered in her heart, "Lord, give me strength today." The hospital loomed ahead, its tall white building glowing faintly under the rising sunday. To most, it was just another workplace in the city. But for Anna, it was both battlefield and sanctuary, a place where lives were saved, tears shed, and hope restored. As the bus hissed to a halt, Anna stood, her wet shoes squeaking against the floor. She stepped down into the street and hurried toward the staff entrance. Her scrubs clung uncomfortably to her skin, but she didn't have time to change. Her shift was already waiting. Inside, the familiar smell of antiseptic and the soft beeping of monitors wrapped around her. Nurses bustled through hallways, doctors flipped through charts, and anxious families clutched coffee cups as they prayed for good news. Anna. A cheerful voice called her name. It was Maria, her fellow nurse and closest friend on the ward. Maria's dark curls bounced as she jogged toward her. But the moment she saw Anna's stained scrubs, her smile faltered. "What on earth happened to you?" Maria gasped, grabbing Anna's sleeve to inspect the dried mud. Anna sighed, shaking her head. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Let's just say, not everyone behind the wheel cares about the people walking by." Maria frowned. "Some rich jerk, huh?" Anna gave a bitter smile. "The richest one of them all. Alexander Cross." Maria's eyes widened. "The billionaire? The one who's always in the news? He did this?" Anna nodded, her voice tight. "Drove right through a puddle, saw me, smirked, and sped off. Like I was invisible." Maria's jaw clenched. "Unbelievable. Some people think money makes them gods." Anna forced a small laugh, though her heart was heavy. "Well, gods don't splash mud on nurses before sunrise." Maria shook her head but squeezed Anna's hand. "Don't let him ruin your day. We've got patients who need us. That's more important than men like him." Anna nodded, grateful for her friend's encouragement. She straightened her shoulders and moved toward the ward. The day stretched on like a marathon. Anna tended to Mr. Thompson, an elderly man recovering from surgery, who clutched her hand and whispered, "Thank you for listening." She adjusted the IV of a teenager named Lily, who had been in a car accident, and reminded her gently, "You're stronger than you think." She rushed between beds, filled out charts, comforted families, and forced a smile even when exhaustion pressed on her like a weight. The mud on her scrubs dried and cracked, a silent reminder of the humiliation she wanted to forget. But it didn't stop her from doing her job. Because Anna knew one truth: in the hospital, lives didn't wait, pain didn't wait, healing couldn't wait. Still, in quiet moments, the image of Alexander Cross's arrogant smirk returned, like a shadow in her mind. Meanwhile, across the city, Alexander himself sat in a glass-walled office on the top floor of Cross Enterprises. From his perch, he could see the whole skyline. Skyscrapers gleamed, cars crawled like ants far below, and everything seemed beneath him. He leaned back in his leather chair, sipping an expensive espresso, while his assistant rattled off numbers and schedules. "Sir, the stock has risen another 2 points, the assistant said eagerly. Alexander smirked. "Of course it has. When you're the best, success follows." His phone buzzed with notifications, business articles praising his brilliance, gossip magazines speculating about his next party, and investment alerts showing his growing fortune. Alexander soaked it in like sunlight. To him, the world was simple, money was power, and he had more of it than anyone else. But beneath the surface of his arrogance, a restlessness simmered. He drowned it with luxury, fast cars, and endless applause. Yet no amount of wealth could silence the emptiness clawing at his heart. Still, he ignored it. After all, feelings were for the weak, and Alexander Cross was never weak. Back at the hospital, Anna sat in the staff lounge for a brief moment, sipping lukewarm coffee. Her body begged for rest, but her mind replayed the morning. She tried to shrug it off, but Maria's words echoed in her ear. Some people think money makes them gods. Anna sighed. I wonder what it's like, she murmured to herself. To have everything, yet care so little about others. Maria plopped into the chair beside her. Trust me, Anna. I'd rather be in muddy scrubs with a kind heart than in a $1,000 suit with no soul. Anna chuckled softly. You're right. But even as they laughed, fate was already turning its wheels. Hours later, Anna's shift neared its end. She was reviewing a chart when the ward suddenly stirred with urgency. A nurse rushed past her, followed by a doctor barking instructions. What's going on? Anna asked, stepping into the hallway. VIP patient coming in, the nurse replied quickly. High priority. The director wants everything perfect. Anna frowned. VIP patients weren't uncommon wealthy donors or public figures, sometimes came to Street Marys for discretion and care. But the tension in the air was different this time, sharper, heavier. Within minutes, the sound of footsteps filled the corridor. Security guards in black suits entered first, scanning the area with sharp eyes. Then came the hospital director, wringing his hands nervously. And behind them, Anna's heart stopped. It was Alexander Cross. The very same man who had splashed mud on her that morning. He walked into the ward as though he owned it, his tailored suit immaculate, his sunglasses still on despite the fluorescent lights. His presence sucked the air out of the hallway. Doctors and nurses stiffened, bowing slightly, eager to please the powerful man. But Anna stood frozen, her eyes locked on him. He didn't notice her, or perhaps he did, but didn't care. His lips curled in the same arrogant smirk she remembered, and his voice filled the room. "I don't care what it takes. I want the best treatment, the best doctors, the best room. Money is no issue." The director nodded eagerly. "Of course, Mr. Cross, you'll have our finest." Anna's chest tightened. She wanted to scream. She wanted to remind him of the morning, of the mud, of the humiliation he had caused. But the hospital wasn't a battlefield for pride. It was a sanctuary for healing. Still, one thought burned in her mind. Fate is strange. First he drenches me in mud, and now he's here, walking into my ward as if destiny refuses to let me escape him. She didn't know what illness or injury had brought him here. She didn't know what role she would have to play in his care. But she knew this. The story between Alexander Cross and Anna Williams had only just begun. And what happened next would test both of their hearts in ways they never imagined. The sirens of the monitors echoed in Anna's ears as her hands moved with precision. Charging, clear. The defibrillator pads pressed to Alexander's chest, his body jolting with the surge of electricity. The room was tense, every eye fixed on the billionaire who had always lived as if he were untouchable. Again charge. Another shock. His body arched, then slumped. Anna's voice was firm, unwavering. "Stay with me, Mr. Cross. You're not leaving this room tonight." The steady rhythm of life returned. Relief swept through the room like a wave. The doctors exhaled, the team eased back, and Alexander's eyelids fluttered open. His gaze, dazed and shaken, landed on Anna. For the first time, there was no smirk, no arrogance, only raw fear and something else. Vulnerability. Anna leaned closer, her voice calm but strong. "You're safe. But you're not invincible, Mr. Cross, not anymore." Later that night, when the ward grew quiet and the chaos subsided, Anna stepped out of his room, her shoulders heavy, but her spirit unbroken. Maria hurried to her. "I heard what happened. Anna, you saved his life." Anna sighed. "It wasn't just me, it was the team. But yes, I was there." Maria shook her head in disbelief. "The same man who splashed mud on you this morning now owes his life to you. That's fate, playing tricks." Anna's eyes darkened. "Maybe it's not fate. Maybe it's a test. To see if I'll treat him the way he treated me." "And will you?" Maria asked softly. Anna didn't hesitate. "No. I'll treat him the way I treat every patient, with dignity, even if he never gave me any." Meanwhile, inside the private suite, Alexander sat propped against his pillows, staring at the ceiling. The reality of his near-death experience gnawed at him. He had built empires, crushed competitors, and bought luxuries most people couldn't even imagine. But none of it had stopped the sudden grip of mortality that had nearly dragged him under. And it was her, the nurse he had disrespected, who had pulled him back. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. His assistant entered with a briefcase. "Sir, I brought the contracts you wanted. We can continue negotiations from here." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Even now, you think I care about contracts?" The assistant faltered. "But sir, the investors." "Leave them, leave everything." Alexander snapped, his voice sharp but trembling beneath the surface. I nearly died tonight. Do you understand that? All your numbers and charts mean nothing if I'm not here tomorrow. The assistant bowed awkwardly and retreated, leaving Alexander alone once again. He pressed a hand against his chest, feeling the dull ache where the defibrillator pads had jolted him. His mind wandered back to Anna, her steady hands, her fierce command, her refusal to break even under pressure. Something about her unsettled him. She was nothing like the people who filled his life. Everyone else bowed, obeyed, or pretended. But she stood tall. The following morning, Alexander was restless. His body was weak, but his pride was alive and well. When Anna entered with her clipboard, he greeted her with his usual smirk. Good morning, Nurse Williams. I trust you enjoyed saving my life last night. Anna raised an eyebrow. It wasn't about enjoyment, Mr. Cross. It was my duty. He chuckled. Duty. You use that word often, as if it means more than money. She glanced at him, her eyes firm. Because it does. You can't buy genuine care. You can't buy compassion. Those things come from the heart. He leaned forward slightly, intrigued. And yet, here you are, working long hours, wearing the same scrubs, living paycheck to paycheck. Doesn't that bother you? Anna didn't flinch. No. Because at the end of my day, I know I've made a difference. That's worth more than all the zeros in your bank account. Her words cut through the air like a blade. For a moment, Alexander's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered. Spoken like someone who's never had power, he replied coolly. Spoken like someone who's never known peace, she countered. The silence that followed was thick. Alexander's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Over the next days, the clash between Anna and Alexander grew sharper. He demanded. She refused to bend. He mocked. She responded with truth. He tested her limits, but she never cracked. One morning, he tried again. You know, Nurse Williams, he drawled as she checked his vitals, most women would kill to spend this much time with me. Do you realize what kind of opportunity you're wasting by treating me like just another patient? Anna glanced at him, her tone even. I don't care about opportunities with you, Mr. Cross. I care about doing my job right. He smirked. So you don't dream of the penthouses? The cars? The parties? Surely there's some part of you that wants to escape this ordinary life. Anna set her pen down and looked him square in the eyes. Ordinary doesn't mean worthless, and rich doesn't mean meaningful. You're so busy climbing your ladder that you've forgotten the ground beneath you. For the first time, Alexander had no reply. Later, when Maria joined Anna for lunch, she whispered, You're playing with fire, Anna. Talking to him like that? He's not used to hearing no. Anna shook her head. Someone needs to remind him he's human. Money may buy him silence from others, but it won't buy it from me. Maria chuckled. You've got courage, I'll give you that. But be careful, his world isn't like ours. People like him, they play games we can't afford. Anna sighed. Then maybe it's time someone showed him that some games aren't worth playing. That evening, Alexander overheard two junior doctors talking outside his room. Can you believe Nurse Williams stood up to him? One whispered. She's brave. I'd be terrified, the other replied. He's used to people bowing. She's different. Alexander lay in bed, staring at the ceiling once more. Their words echoed what he already knew. She was different. He didn't know why it unsettled him so much. But he knew one thing: this clash between their worlds wasn't over. Because every time Anna stood her ground, it chipped away at the walls he had built around himself. And for Alexander Cross, walls were everything. If they fell, what would remain? The sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows across the hospital ward. The day had been routine, at least on the surface, but something restless lingered in the air, a quiet tension that neither Alexander nor Anna could shake. Anna entered his room, clipboard in hand. She found Alexander sitting by the window, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed on the city below. He didn't turn when she spoke. "Your vitals are stable today. That's good news." "Stable," he muttered bitterly. "It's a word they use for machines, not men." Anna studied him carefully. His tone was sharper than usual, his eyes darker. She set the clipboard aside and crossed her arms. "Then tell me, Mr. Cross, what word would you use for yourself?" He finally turned, his smirk gone, his voice low. "Broken." The word hung in the air like a confession. Later that evening, while Alexander tried to sleep, the sound of raised voices echoed from the hallway. Curious, Anna stepped out and noticed his assistant speaking urgently to a doctor. "You cannot release those files," the assistant hissed. "If he finds out—" Anna's brow furrowed. "Files?" She returned quietly to Alexander's room, her mind racing. Something wasn't right. The next morning, she found Alexander pacing his room, his usual calm arrogance stripped away. "They're digging," he snapped when she entered. His voice was raw, almost panicked. "Who?" she asked softly. "The press. My competitors. They're sniffing around, and soon they'll know." Anna frowned. "Know what?" For a long moment, he said nothing. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched. Then, finally, he sank into the chair, the weight of his silence heavier than any words. "You think you see me," he murmured, "but you don't. You see the mask I built, the billionaire, the untouchable man. But the truth would ruin me." Anna stepped closer. "Then maybe it's time you let someone see the truth, even if it's ugly." His eyes flicked to hers, searching, conflicted. And for the first time, he spoke the words he had buried for years. Flashback begins. A lavish mansion. A boy no older than 12 stands in the hallway, his fists balled as he listens to shouts echoing from behind a locked door. "Failure!" A man's voice roars. "You'll never be enough!" The boy trembles, tears streaking his face. A delicate hand rests on his shoulder, his mother's. "Don't listen to him, Alex," she whispers, pulling him close. "You're more than his words. One day, you'll prove it." But the shouting grows louder. The mother flinches, pulling the boy away. "Come, quickly." They flee to the back garden, where the boy hides behind hedges, while his mother confronts the towering figure of his father. A crash, a scream. Then, silence. When the boy peeks out, his mother is lying on the ground, broken, unmoving. Alexander's voice cracked as the memory ended. She was gone, just like that, and he called it an accident, but I knew what he had done. Anna's breath caught. "Your father." Alexander's eyes burned with fury. The great Richard Cross. Billionaire tycoon. Respected. Feared. But behind the doors of that mansion? A monster. He stood abruptly, pacing. His voice grew harder, filled with decades of rage. "I swore I'd never be like him. I swore I'd take everything he built and make it mine. I'd rise so high, no one could ever treat me as weak again." Anna's heart ached at his confession. She saw it now, the arrogance, the cruelty, the endless drive. It wasn't pride alone, it was armor. Armor forged in the fire of pain. She stepped closer, her voice steady but gentle. "And did it work? Did building your empire erase the boy who lost his mother?" His head snapped toward her, eyes blazing. Don't pity me." "I'm not pitying you," she replied firmly. "I'm telling you the truth. No matter how much money you stack, no matter how many towers you build, pain doesn't vanish. It waits. And sooner or later, it breaks through. For a long, Tense silence. Alexander said nothing. His breathing was heavy, his fists clenched. Then slowly his shoulders slumped. She was the only one who ever looked at me and saw. Me, he whispered. Not the heir. Not the name. Just me. Anna's voice softened. Maybe it's time you let someone else see you that way. His eyes locked on hers, raw and unguarded. The silence between them carried more weight than words. But the moment shattered when the door swung open. Alexander's assistant rushed in, face pale. "Sir, the press has the story. They're publishing tonight." Alexander stiffened, fury flooding back. "What story?" The assistant swallowed. "About your father, the abuse, the cover-up." Anna froze. Her eyes darted to Alexander. He didn't deny it. He didn't flinch. He only whispered, "So the mask finally breaks." Later that night, Anna found him alone again, standing by the window. "They'll eat me alive," he said bitterly. "The board, the shareholders, the vultures. They'll say I'm weak. They'll say I'm unfit. And they'll be right." "No," Anna replied firmly. "They'll say what they always say, but that doesn't make it truth. You've lived your whole life in someone else's shadow. Maybe this is your chance to finally step out." He looked at her, torn between fear and defiance. And for the first time, Alexander, crossed the man who built walls of steel around his soul, let a single tear fall. The shocking truth was out. The billionaire's empire would never look the same again. But as Anna stood beside him, something unspoken passed between them. The mask was cracking. And beneath it, the real Alexander Cross was finally being revealed. The news broke like wildfire. By dawn, Alexander Cross's name was everywhere, plastered across headlines, whispered on talk shows, dissected by strangers who knew nothing about his pain. Billionaire's family secrets exposed. Violence and wealth. The dark legacy of Richard Cross. Alexander Cross, hero or hypocrite? Screens flickered with his face, once untouchable, now dissected and judged by millions. In the quiet of his hospital room, Alexander sat alone, phone in hand, scrolling through the chaos he had spent his life trying to outrun. Each headline was a knife. Each comment, a fresh wound. And beneath it all, silence. None of his friends called. Not a single business partner reached out. When the empire trembled, the empire's builders vanished. Anna entered the room quietly, carrying a tray of medication. She had seen the headlines too. The nurses whispered in the break room, some gloating, others pitying. But Anna? She just felt heavy. "Mr. Cross," she said softly, "it's time for your meds." He didn't respond. His eyes stayed fixed on the phone. She set the tray down gently. "Alexander." At the sound of his name, he finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, sleepless. The mask that once made him invincible was gone. "Why are you here?" he muttered. "To see the mighty fall?" Anna shook her head. "No, I'm here because you're still my patient." He let out a bitter laugh. "You don't have to pretend anymore. The whole world knows now. I'm not the man they thought I was." She met his gaze firmly. "You're right, you're not, you're human. And that's not a weakness." His jaw tightened. "You say that now. But you weren't there when they broke me. You didn't see what I became to survive." "I don't need to," she said. "I've seen enough." Her voice didn't waver, even when his bitterness did. Later that afternoon, Anna walked into the staff lounge. 2 nurses were watching the news, snickering. "Imagine," one said. "All that money. And he can't even hide his family's dirt." "Serves him right," the other muttered. "People like him think they're gods." Anna's jaw tightened. "That's enough." They looked up, startled. "You don't know what he's been through," she continued. "Mocking his pain doesn't make you stronger. It just makes you cruel." The room fell silent. Anna turned and left, her heart pounding, She didn't know why she was defending him, the man who once humiliated her in the street, but something in her soul wouldn't let her stay quiet. That night, as the hospital dimmed and visiting hours ended, Anna noticed Alexander standing by the window again, IV still attached, silhouetted against the city lights. "You should be resting," she said gently. He didn't turn. "I don't know how to rest." Anna stepped closer. "You've spent your whole life fighting ghosts. Maybe it's time to stop." He gave a weak laugh. "Stop? Do you know what happens to men like me when we stop? We disappear." "Maybe disappearing isn't the worst thing," she replied softly. "Sometimes you have to lose the world to find your soul." He looked at her, then really looked. The nurse who refused to bow to him now stood there with quiet strength, her compassion unshaken. "You still see something worth saving," he said quietly. "Even after everything I did to you." Anna hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. Because grace isn't earned. It's given." For the first time, Alexander's walls completely broke. He sank into the chair, hands covering his face. His shoulders shook, not from anger but from surrender. "I don't deserve kindness," he whispered. "None of us do," Anna replied. "That's what makes it real." Days passed. The media storm raged on, but inside the hospital, a strange calm began to take root. Alexander was different. He spoke less, listened more. He asked about other patients. He even apologized quietly, sincerely to the staff he had once treated like servants. When Anna saw him smile for the first time without arrogance, she almost didn't recognize him. One evening, as she adjusted his IV line, he spoke softly. "You know, I used to believe compassion was weakness. My father told me once, 'Kind men die poor.' I spent my whole life trying to prove him right." "And now?" Anna asked. He met her gaze. "Now I think he was wrong." She smiled faintly. "That's progress." He chuckled under his breath. "It's a start." Later, as she prepared to leave, she turned back at the door. "You'll be discharged soon. What will you do then?" He looked out the window, thoughtful. "I don't know. For the first time in my life, I don't have an answer." She nodded. "Maybe that's good. It means you're not running anymore." That night, when the halls were silent, Alexander reached for his phone but not to read the news. Instead, he opened an email draft addressed to his board of directors. "Effective immediately, I'm taking a leave of absence. I've spent my life building walls. It's time I start building bridges." He stared at the words for a long time before pressing send. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "Thank you, Anna." The next morning, as she checked his chart, he greeted her quietly. "Nurse Williams." She looked up. "I owe you something," he said. She smiled. "You owe me nothing, Mr. Cross." He shook his head. "No. I owe you my respect, my gratitude, and maybe my first lesson in being human again." Anna's eyes softened. "Then start with this one: humility doesn't make you smaller, it makes you real." He nodded slowly. "And compassion? It makes you strong." The day of his discharge arrived. The cameras waited outside the hospital, hungry for a broken billionaire to photograph. But when Alexander stepped out, he didn't hide behind tinted glass or bodyguards. He walked out quietly, head held high beside a nurse in plain scrubs who had taught him what wealth could never buy. As the flashes went off, he didn't flinch. He just smiled faintly and said under his breath, "For the first time, they can see me." Anna looked at him and whispered, "And for the first time, you're not afraid." Music swells, gentle piano, hopeful tone, voice fades softly. Compassion isn't weakness, it's strength in disguise. And sometimes, the people we hurt the most are the ones who remind us who we are meant to be. It had been weeks since the accident. The nurse still walked through the hospital halls with quiet grace, her uniform spotless, her eyes steady. But somewhere in the same building, behind a closed VIP room door, The man who once laughed at her humiliation was now fighting his own silence. The billionaire Armand sat in that hospital bed, staring at the wall. For the first time in years, his phone lay untouched. No calls, no assistance, no luxury. Just stillness, and the faint echo of a heart monitor. He had all the money in the world, but right now, none of it could buy him peace. He could still remember that day, the splash of mud, the look in her eyes. He'd laughed, drunk on pride, too self-absorbed to notice the pain behind her silence. But now, that same silence haunted him. Every morning, when the nurse entered his room with quiet professionalism, something inside him twisted. She never reminded him who she was. Never threw the memory in his face. She simply did her job with kindness, precision, and dignity. Why don't you hate me?" He had whispered it once, barely audible. She didn't answer. She just smiled faintly, adjusted his IV, and said, "Hate doesn't heal, Mr. Armand. Only compassion does." Those words burned deeper than any wound. Each passing day felt like a mirror being held up to his soul, one he couldn't escape. For the first time, Armand started to listen. He watched her, how she greeted every patient, how she smiled even after exhausting shifts, how she never complained about long hours or rude patients. There was strength in her simplicity, and a quiet power in her humility. He began noticing the things he'd always ignored: the janitor sweeping the floor, the nurse comforting a crying child, the old patient praying alone in the corner. These people didn't have wealth or fame, yet somehow, they seemed richer than him. Change doesn't happen in a single moment. It begins as a whisper, a question, a crack in the armor. And for Armand, that crack was widening. He started reading the books she left on her desk, noticed the way she paused before praying, saw the gratitude she expressed for even small things: a cup of coffee, a kind word, a sunrise through the window. And one night, long after the halls went quiet, Armand found himself unable to sleep. The pain from his injuries had lessened, but the ache in his chest, an ache he couldn't name, had grown stronger. He sat up, reached for the journal the nurse had left by accident on the table. Inside, between folded pages, was a simple handwritten line: "No one is beyond redemption. Even the proudest heart can learn to kneel." He froze. Those words struck something deep within him. Redemption. Kneeling. Two things he'd never allowed himself to think about. The next morning, when she came in, something in him broke. "I remember that day. The mud, the laughter. I was cruel to you. I don't even know why. I guess I thought power meant never being wrong." The nurse looked at him quietly, her eyes soft but firm. "Sometimes people hurt others because they're hurting themselves. But you can always start over." Her words were simple, but they carried more weight than any boardroom speech he'd ever given. That afternoon, for the first time in his life, Armand did something small but monumental. He thanked her. Not in his usual distant, transactional way, but from the heart. "Armand," softly, "thank you for taking care of me, even when I didn't deserve it." The nurse smiled faintly. "Everyone deserves care, Mr. Armand. That's what makes us human." Days turned into weeks, and soon Armand began asking questions, not about stocks or profits, but about people. About her life, her family, her struggles. He listened, really listened. He learned that she worked double shifts to support her younger brother's education, that she volunteered at a free clinic on weekends, that she'd once dreamed of becoming a doctor, but gave up the dream to care for her ailing mother. And for the first time, he admired someone not for their power but for their perseverance. In her quietness, he found humility. In her forgiveness, he found peace. And in her compassion, he found a mirror of the man he could still become. There was a night when the city lights flickered outside, and thunder rolled across the sky. The nurse entered with a lantern when the power went out. Armand watched her moving carefully through the room, her calm presence steady amidst the storm. "Armand," softly, "you remind me of someone." She looked up. Who? He hesitated, voice cracking. My mother. She used to smile the same way, no matter how hard things got. For a moment, the walls between them vanished. Two souls, once separated by pride and pain, shared a silent connection under dim light. As days went on, the transformation deepened. Armand started asking the hospital staff if he could donate anonymously to improve their conditions. He requested that his own treatment fees be used to buy medical supplies for those who couldn't afford them. The man who once measured life by luxury now found meaning in generosity. He no longer demanded special treatment, he no longer snapped at delays. And when he saw the janitor cleaning spilled water one morning, he knelt down to help, an image that left the entire staff speechless. The nurse saw it too, and in her eyes, a glimmer of quiet pride flickered. The arrogant billionaire, who once splashed mud on a nurse, was beginning to wash the dirt from his own soul. It wasn't just a change of behavior, it was a rebirth of heart. A turning point that no wealth could buy, and no scandal could destroy. In that sterile hospital room, surrounded by beeping machines and the faint smell of antiseptic, something divine was happening, a redemption written not in gold, but in grace. And though neither of them said it out loud, both knew it in their hearts. Forgiveness had planted a seed. And soon, it would bloom into something extraordinary. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't happen in palaces or penthouses, but in the quiet hearts of those who choose compassion over pride. And for Armand, this was just the beginning. Morning sunlight spilled through the tall hospital windows, painting the white walls with a golden hue. It was peaceful, almost sacred. For weeks now, Armand had been healing not just in body, but in spirit. The billionaire who once measured life by power and prestige was now learning something far greater, the weight and beauty of forgiveness. He sat quietly, a journal in his hand. No assistants, no flashing screens, no schedule filled with meetings. Just a man broken, rebuilding, and ready to face the truth. There comes a point in every person's life when the mirror stops reflecting your face and starts reflecting your soul. Armand stared at his own reflection in the window. How did I become this person? He whispered to himself. When did I start believing that money made me better than others? The nurse entered with her usual grace, clipboard in hand. Her name, Maya, had become a symbol of peace in his restless days. Every time she walked in, Armand felt the sting of his past soften, replaced by something unfamiliar but pure: humility. How are you feeling today, Mr. Armand? He smiled faintly. Better than I deserve. She glanced up from the chart, sensing the change in his tone. We all deserve to heal, she said quietly. He looked at her for a long moment, his voice low. Even the ones who caused pain? Maya met his eyes. Especially them. Her words lingered like a soft echo, touching something deep inside him. That day, after she left, Armand made a decision. It was time to set things right. He asked for a wheelchair, insisting he wanted to move around the hospital himself. The staff hesitated, but he insisted, not out of pride, but out of purpose. He rolled through the corridors, seeing faces he'd never noticed before: the janitor, the receptionist, the patients who smiled despite pain. Each face told a story he'd been too blind to see before. He stopped near the children's ward. Laughter echoed inside, light and pure. He peered through the glass window and saw Maya kneeling beside a young boy, helping him draw a sun on paper. Her laughter filled the room like sunlight. In that moment, Armand felt something shift, a realization that wealth wasn't meant to be stored, it was meant to serve. Later that day, he called his company for the first time since his accident. But not to check stocks or meetings. I want to start a new foundation. A hospital fund. Free care for anyone who can't afford it. Use my personal assets if you have to. No publicity, no branding. Just help people. There was silence on the other end. His assistant was speechless. The man who once threw lavish parties was now giving away his fortune quietly, like a man who had finally found peace in surrender. True redemption doesn't need applause. It only needs intention. Days passed. Armin began writing letters, one to every person he had wronged. Former employees he'd fired unfairly, partners he'd betrayed in business, even his estranged family members. Each letter was raw, honest, drenched in remorse. He didn't know if they'd forgive him, but he needed them to know he was sorry. When Maya came in later that evening, she noticed the stack of envelopes beside his bed. "What's all this?" she asked softly. Armin smiled faintly. "My apology tour, a little late, I know." She placed her hand over his. "It's never too late to be kind, Mr. Armin." It was the first time he noticed her calling him Mr. Armin. Wasn't out of respect for his wealth anymore, but for his effort to change. The next morning, Armin did something that stunned the entire hospital. He asked to speak with the staff, every nurse, janitor, doctor, and clerk. When they gathered in the hospital lobby, he wheeled himself to the front. The once arrogant billionaire looked humble, now dressed simply, eyes lowered. "I owe many of you an apology. Some of you I ignored, some I disrespected, and one of you," his eyes found Maya in the crowd, "I humiliated. That day, when I splashed mud on you, I didn't just dirty your uniform, I stained my own soul. I can't undo it, but I can start living differently." The room was silent. Even the sound of the air conditioner seemed to fade. He took a breath and continued. "I've spent years chasing power, but power without compassion is just emptiness dressed in gold. You all taught me something I never learned in boardrooms, that true wealth isn't measured in money, it's measured in mercy." Maya's eyes glistened with quiet tears. Around her, nurses exchanged soft smiles. Even the janitor who had once been invisible to Armin wiped his eyes. Forgiveness has a language of its own. It doesn't shout, it heals in whispers. When the gathering ended, Maya approached him slowly. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "I did," he replied. "I needed to." She smiled. "Then maybe you're finally free." He tilted his head. "Free?" "Yes," she said, "from yourself." That night, Armin couldn't sleep. But it wasn't the restlessness of guilt, it was the stirring of peace. He walked to the hospital garden, the night air cool on his skin. The city glimmered in the distance, but for the first time, he didn't crave its lights. He looked up at the stars and whispered a simple prayer, one he hadn't said since he was a child. "God, thank you for not giving up on me." The next morning, he requested something unusual. He wanted to be discharged, not into his mansion, but into a small apartment near the hospital. "I'll come back every week," he told Maya, "not as a patient, but as a helper." And he did. He spent his mornings visiting patients who had no family. He brought them meals, paid their bills anonymously, read stories to children in the cancer ward. Word spread, but he never took credit. To him, this wasn't charity, it was redemption in motion. Maya often saw him sitting beside patients, listening quietly, smiling softly. And every time their eyes met, there was a silent understanding, a story written in grace. The man who once laughed at someone's pain now found joy in easing others. The heart that once sought admiration now sought forgiveness. And somewhere in that journey, he found God again. Because forgiveness isn't just about being forgiven. It's about forgiving yourself, and then choosing to love anyway. Armin had once splashed mud on an innocent nurse. But now, he was washing the feet of the broken not with water, but with humility. The world hadn't changed. He had. And sometimes, that's the only miracle we need. Time has a strange way of weaving redemption into the ordinary. Months had passed since that fateful day, the day mud splashed, pride fell, and compassion rose. The billionaire who once laughed at pain was now a quiet visitor in the hospital he once treated like a hotel. Every morning, Armin arrived with a thermos of tea for the staff. Every evening, he checked on patients who had no families to visit them. The same halls that once echoed with his arrogance now carried the sound of his gentle footsteps. But life, as it often does, was preparing one last lesson for him, one final, shocking turn. That morning began like any other. The air smelled faintly of sanitizer and brewed coffee. Nurses hurried between rooms. Patients whispered prayers of thanks. Armand was in the children's ward, reading a storybook aloud. His laughter filled the room, real, unguarded, free. Then Maya appeared at the door, smiling softly. Maya, warmly. "Mr. Armand, you're going to spoil them with too many stories." He chuckled. "If anyone deserves stories, it's them." She tilted her head. "You've changed so much. The children adore you. The staff does too. Even the janitor said you thanked him for cleaning your room." He smiled faintly. "It's the least I can do. I spent years ignoring people who kept my world running. I can't undo the past, but I can honor the present." Maya looked at him thoughtfully. "You already are." She turned to leave, but before she could, Armand stopped her. "Maya, wait." She turned, eyebrows raised. He hesitated. "I've been thinking about something. About you." She blinked, slightly surprised. He continued, his voice softer now. "I know I said sorry, but I've never told you the truth, the real reason I was so cruel that day." Maya's eyes softened, urging him to go on. "Armand, quietly. I wasn't laughing at you, not really. I was laughing at myself. I'd just left my lawyer's office that morning. My mother's will had arrived. She'd left everything to charity, every cent. I was furious. I thought money was the only thing that proved I mattered. And then I saw you. Happy, humble, content in your simple uniform. It made me angry because you had peace, and I didn't. So I tried to humiliate you to feel powerful again." He looked away, his eyes glistening. "But that day, I lost everything that mattered." For a moment, the room fell silent, just the sound of the heart monitor beeping softly. Maya took a step closer, her voice calm, steady. "Maya, gentle. I knew there had to be more to your story. We all carry pain, Mr. Armand. But the beauty of pain is that it can be turned into purpose if we let it." Armand smiled through tears. "I finally understand what my mother wanted. She wasn't punishing me, she was freeing me." That evening, Armand stood outside the hospital, watching the sunset burn gold against the city skyline. For the first time, he didn't feel small or restless. He felt complete. He whispered, "Thank you, Mother." And then, with quiet peace, he walked home the humble apartment that now felt richer than any mansion he'd ever owned. But destiny had one more page to turn. The next morning, Armand didn't show up at the hospital. The staff thought he might be resting, but as hours passed, Maya felt uneasy. She decided to visit his apartment after her shift. When she arrived, the door was slightly open. The room was spotless, a single candle burning near the window. On the table sat his journal, and beside it a letter addressed to her. Her heart pounded as she picked it up. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "Dear Maya, if you're reading this, it means my time has come. Don't be sad. For the first time in years, my heart is at peace. The doctors told me the truth a few weeks ago, that my heart was weaker than they thought. I didn't tell you because I didn't want pity. I wanted my last days to be filled with purpose, and you gave me that. You taught me that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's power. I came into this hospital as a man drowning in pride, but I'm leaving this world with gratitude. Please use whatever I've left behind to continue helping others. There's a foundation account under your name now, the Maya Hope Fund. It's for nurses, single mothers, and children who can't afford care. It's my final apology, my final gift. Thank you for showing me what true wealth means. With peace, Armand." Maya's hands trembled as tears streamed down her face. She looked around the small apartment, simple, quiet, filled with warmth. On the nightstand sat a framed photo. A young Armin with his mother, both smiling. He was gone. But in his leaving, he had given more life than he ever had in his living. The next day, the hospital gathered in silence. Maya stood before the staff, holding his letter. Her voice quivered as she read it aloud. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Armand, once the symbol of pride, had become the symbol of grace. Weeks later, the Maya Hope Foundation opened its doors. A small plaque hung at the entrance, engraved with Armand's final words: "True wealth isn't found in what you keep, but in what you give away." Maya continued her work treating the poor, comforting the broken, and teaching new nurses that compassion is the greatest medicine. And every time she walked through the hospital garden, she felt the wind brush softly against her face, as if someone unseen was saying, "Thank you." In life, people may remember your success, but they will never forget your kindness. A single act of cruelty can wound deeply, but a single act of compassion can heal generations. Armand's story began with a splash of mud, but it ended with a river of mercy. He had been the storm in someone's day, and became the shelter in someone's life. So when life tempts you to look down on someone, remember this story. Because the person you hurt today might be the hand that saves you tomorrow. And sometimes, the richest hearts are found in the poorest places.